We are very fortunate to be joined by Molly Kraus. Molly is the Research and Evaluation Team Director at GRYD. Molly serves as that director, and she has over a decade of experience in developing data infrastructures and working with community-based organizations to connect the research to practice through that data feedback loop. So couldn't think of a more perfect expert for today's topic. She and her team craft policies to support and standardize data collection, provide training, and serve as architects, administrators, and report writers for both ETL and applicant databases. And in 2022, Molly and the GRYD Research and Evaluation team were recognized by Social Solutions Global, now Bonterra, as a data-driven champion, which is a program which distinguishes individuals and organizations for exemplary utilization of data and accelerating lasting impact. So you're super lucky to learn from one of your peers today. Molly, thank you so much for joining us. And I will let you take it away and take a back seat.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Amanda. I'm excited to be here today. Let me just start sharing my screen and then we can jump right in. All right, Amanda, thumbs up, right? I think that means we can see my screen and we are good to go. Okay, so again, thanks. Good morning. Thank you for joining me for the webinar today. Again, my name is Molly Kraus, and I currently serve as the director of a research and evaluation team that is based out of California State University, Los Angeles. So we've got both coasts, right, at least on the call today. For nearly a decade, our team has been engaged by the City of Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development Programs, or GRYD, right, which is much simpler and shorter to say, as we like to call it. And what we do as a team is provide oversight and support for data management, research, and evaluation. So to get started, I just want to take a minute to contextualize some of the practice examples that I'll be providing as we move along. So I'm going to start with providing a quick overview of GRYD services. So the GRYD office is a city entity that funds community-based organizations throughout the city of Los Angeles to provide services in the areas of community engagement, gang prevention, gang intervention, and violence interruption. Delivery of these services is coordinated under the GRYD comprehensive strategy, and you can see an image of that in overview on the screen. A core value of the GRYD comprehensive strategy is to bridge research and practice to deliver services effectively. This value is manifested in activities related to data infrastructure building, engaging with providers in the development and use of this infrastructure, and in the ongoing utilization of data to better support the delivery of services. I am delighted to be here and have the opportunity to share this work and to talk about the process of building and using a data-formed infrastructure and moving organizationally from, as we put in the description, being data aware toward being data informed. So we hear a lot about being data informed. And as with many popular concepts, this can sometimes feel a little bit difficult to define, let alone put into practice. And as I was preparing for this webinar today, I really wanted to take a minute and think about what it means to be data informed, right? What are we really talking about? And what is a program or organization really doing when it is described this way? So generally speaking, right, we define being data informed as using data as a tool or resource in order to generate actionable insights into a business or program, et cetera. So there are steps involved in the process of generating those insights. And I did a little bit of a Google search, right? I'm a visual learner, as many of us are, and I really liked the way that this diagram outlines the steps that are involved in having a data-informed decision-making process. So I borrowed it and I'm sharing it with you today. And it breaks those steps, right, of being data informed in your decision making into the steps of asking, right, identifying what you want to learn about your program or process, acquiring, right, seeing what data you have or you need in order to be able to answer those questions, analyze, right, some of our favorite places when we work in the research world, right, working with your research partners or your teams internally to see what your data shows. Applying the finding of that research, right? Bringing professional expertise to discussions around the data. And I think this is right a critical place to where practitioners and their expertise comes into play in the conversation. Announce, right? Decide and communicate. So come up with an action plan. right? What does your data say? What are you going to do about what your data says? What will you do with the findings of that data? And then assess, right? Have you put your action plan in place? Is it working? And are you seeing those desired results? So now this all sounds really great, right? We ask questions, we use the data, we apply the data, but, right, how do we reach a place where the data is available for this type of use, right? We have to start somewhere. We need those building blocks in place. So the pathway to becoming data informed, from my perspective, begins with building a data infrastructure and putting into place mechanisms that first provide data management and support, and second, create the capacity to utilize data to produce program insights that can lead to improved service delivery and other goals over time. So jumping right in, right, we're going to cover some core components that are involved in this data infrastructure building. So when we want to consider working towards becoming data informed, right, we talk about how technology can be used to achieve or to enhance, right, our work in these areas. And I'm also going to provide a few examples of how we can implement these components in practice in the work that we've done with GRYD. So the core components that we're going to be taking a look at today include, right, how we can build a stronger data infrastructure, how we create support for better understanding and use of data systems, how we implement research to practice feedback loops, how we integrate, right, the use of that data into our organizational culture, and how we can then build the organization's capacity to more effectively assess our impact over time. So our first core component today, right, is building a stronger data infrastructure. So a basic building block towards becoming data informed is to put in place a robust data infrastructure that can be used to capture program efforts. This part of the work is an investment in organizational capacity to tell the story of its own work and to better understand program efforts and outcomes. Of course, the star of our data infrastructure is our data system. So thank you, Bonterra, right, for having those data systems available. And these data systems really play an integral role, right, in data collection and then building the capacity for research and evaluation. In my experience, it's critical that data systems are built and that care is taken to align data measures with service delivery and to include measures that are capable of producing metrics that are meaningful to your organization, right? Any old measure won't do. It really needs to say something about the type of services that you provide and the type of impact that you're trying to have with your work. So in addition to building out your amazing data system, right, a robust data infrastructure also includes support for use of this system in areas such as data administration, technical assistance provision, and the presentation of data back to practitioners. So looking at a practice example of this, right, around building your data infrastructure, already it might feel like a lot. You're like, oh, this is all this building that has to take place. So I wanted to take a look at what that arc has looked like for GRYD. And as you can see in this practice example, the process of building a GRYD data infrastructure has taken time and dedication over a number of years in order to reach full maturity. But in my experience, it is well worth the effort to stay the course. So in this instance, as is typical with many organizations, programming began, right, and that was 2007. Oh my goodness, right, when the GRYD office was formed and services first began to be delivered in 2008. It really feels like a lifetime ago at this point. But right, that really began with limited data collection taking place, right? Services were just starting to happen within the field. And it wasn't organized in a way, right, that made some things possible. But starting then on, right, in 2011 and 2012, both program delivery and data collection began to become standardized across GRYD providers. So you start to introduce, right, policies and procedures that guide this work, both within how we are looking at the data and how services are being delivered. So it's important to note here that providers are included in the process of developing these areas and contributed by providing feedback on language and concepts included in data measures to ensure that important nuances of service delivery would be captured. So we built out the first data systems, right, gosh, in 2011 and 2012. And then we had, right, I guess, the fortunate issue of our initial data system being overburdened with the capacity of the data that was being collected. And we started looking for new options. So that led us right on into our phase 3, which was 2012, 2013, exploring, right, how can we increase our data infrastructure? And that led us to, build out a new GRYD database, which was an ETO-based system. So 2013 is really when, that exploration into standardizing and enhancing our data infrastructure began. So after the years, right, the infrastructure truly began to flourish, and additional components and initiatives were built out to provide support around the data, right? Likewise, programming had been standardized. So we had policies that aligned with the data collection, and we were working citywide, right, as a team to be able to ensure that these things were implemented. And then we reached, right, our last phase starting 2017 to present, which really sees, right, that robustness of the data infrastructure coming into place. So providers receiving, right, additional support through an intranet, right, really technical assistance being available, and starting to look at how we're enhancing service delivery through use of that data. So certainly this is a process that won't happen overnight, and it can take time to really fully integrate on your journey towards becoming data informed. I do want to point out here as well that throughout this time period covered, right, the work hasn't been static. New initiatives have come on board, and core services have continued to evolve, both in practice and in the accompanying data collection. So I think this is one space where access to data system technologies, right, such as our use of ETO and then, right, a later edition of Apricot, because, right, good to have two data systems to use. And both of these systems really have allowed us to be responsive to change in our program and to provide tools to manage this change and to simplify workflows. That has been extremely useful for us in reaching our goals. For GRYD, the GRYD research and evaluation team, there you go, serves as a core connector between research and practice, serving both to provide, right, these key capacities of data management and support, and to engage service providers in the use of their data. So first, we're going to take a look at data management and support in that side of the work. Right, so our next core component is creating that support for better understanding and use of the data systems. So understanding and use of data systems is not always something that comes naturally. It's not always something, right, that everyone enjoys in their work. And so it's really important that part of becoming data informed is having the systems in place that support practitioners in these areas. This support can take a lot of forms, but generally includes having staff available to provide technical assistance, a dedication to the sharing of resources and information that document the policies and procedures related to data collection, and the inclusion of a training mechanism to onboard staff in their use of the data system. These components serve to create connections between data and practice in an ongoing way and constitute a large part of the work that the GRYD research and evaluation team conducts. So looking at that in practice, like what are we really doing, right, when we're talking about, these areas? So with GRYD, we have really put into place several components to support the understanding and use of GRYD's data. First, the branch of the research and evaluation team at Cal State LA specializes in not only GRYD's data systems, but also in really understanding GRYD's programming. And this really allows us to configure, right, our ETO and Apricot data systems in a way that is meaningful, right, to service delivery. The team also implements new data system features as they become available in order to improve data collection workflows and strives to leverage features to support program goals. The team works closely, right, with an advanced services consultant. I'm always getting that acronym wrong, our ASC, right, at Bonterra, who provides us information around best practices and system configuration and helps us gain insights into expected feature behavior, provides guidance on best practices, and helps us with creative solving probleming around any issues when we're onboarding new initiatives. So we do really spend, right, we didn't just build the system and leave it. We, in an ongoing way, spend a lot of time and effort in ensuring that our database configuration is aligned with, right, current programming. Second, the team provides both remote and in-demand technical assistance citywide for the use of, right, GRYD's Apricot and ETO instances. One of the challenges of working with a large initiative that is spread over multiple locations, we found has been the dissemination of information. So in order to address this challenge, the team developed what we call our GRYD intranet, right? It's a web-based system that houses all handbooks, forms, and policy documents related to the provision of GRYD services, their accompanying data collection, and the administration of assessment tools. I will point out that if you might be an Apricot user, you can also house some of these things directly in Apricot, which is a really cool feature that we're starting to explore more as well. An additional challenge faced over the years for us has been staff turnover, both within the GRYD office and at community organizations. right, it started to feel, especially right when I was leading the training, that all I ever got to do was a basic training on, hey, push this button to add a participant, right? And push this button to add a form. But we weren't really able to get deeper than that. So in order to address, right, these ongoing sort of basic training needs, the team built into our intranet an online learning management system through which the GRYD office and provider staff are able to earn self-paced certifications that cover foundational concepts of both how to deliver GRYD services, as well as how to complete the data capture within ETO and Apricot databases. With core training completed online, now the efforts of the GRYD research and evaluation team staff can be much more focused and dive deeper in different areas when we meet. Another aspect, right, of creating support to increase understanding and use of data has been the development and programming of reports, right, within both of our data systems, and making a reporting suite available to all users, right, really striving to have data front and center in the experience of data systems users on a daily basis. A report focused on key areas related to service delivery and critical measures to complete or correct within data collection. Technology available within these data systems is utilized here as well in the form of scheduled reports, right? Putting those key data insights again, not only within the data system, but directly within the inboxes of practitioners and GRYD partners. Our next core component takes a look at implementing research to data feedback loops. So data-informed decision-making process that we looked at earlier states that in order to make data-informed decisions, right, we ask a question, we obtain data pertinent to investigating this question, we analyze the data, we apply the findings to our practice, we determine a plan of action based on the findings, and then we observe the outcome. So nowhere is this approach implemented more fully within our field of work than within research to practice feedback loops, which specifically work to bring evaluation results back to practitioners for a discussion around improvement of service delivery. So research to practice feedback loops include practitioners in conversations around what the data shows and encourage our partners to take a critical look both at what is working within programming and where there may be opportunities for growth and change. So looking at the practice example, right, as mentioned earlier, a core value of the comprehensive strategy for GRYD is bridging research and practice to deliver services effectively. And this concept and this training is really one of my favorite initiatives that the team has conducted, which we call the GRYD Data Feedback Loop Training. So the GRYD Data Feedback Loop training was developed after, right, early program evaluation results around like 2017 showed for both GRYD's gang intervention and prevention programming that we had a high rate of early program attrition overall. In fact, right, so we identified, right, that the data showed that the vast majority of unsuccessful program exits happened early within the program cycle after participants had been enrolled only for a couple of months. And so we asked that question, who is dropping out of programming and how can program attrition be addressed? So the result of asking this question became our GRYD Data Feedback Loop training. And the reporting suite available to practitioners in ETO was updated to include measures, right, that we identified as part of this training so that we could increase, right, in real time, the potential for program dropout. But in order to dig in around the question, the research and evaluation team returned to the service data, right? So we returned to our data collected by community practitioners, which documents socio-demographic characteristics of participants and create a record of services received during enrollment. The next step, right, was to complete analyses that compared those who dropped out of services to those who exited successfully across a number of these factors, such as gender, right, arrests prior to programming, involvement with probation or other systems, program attendance, etc. And we used this in order to identify places where there were statistically significant differences between participants who were dropping out of programming and those who were not. So for example, right, as part of this analysis, it was found that participants who were in need of housing services at program intake were more likely to drop out of services than those who were not in need of housing services at program intake. So feedback reports of the key family, individual, and community characteristics identified as being related to program dropout were produced, right, in the aggregate overall for each community-based organization who provided, right, either GRYD gang intervention or gang prevention services. And the next step was that we, with our research and evaluation team and members of the GRYD office and the community partners, we all got together and spent some time meeting to really look at this data together, right? To discuss our feedback reports and to work with providers to connect findings into practice. This was really, an incredible process because looking at that data and talking with the data, right, we're bringing in the expertise of the practitioners to help to really understand what the data means in this instance. So for example, in identifying areas of improvement, practitioners were then tasked with creating a strategy action plan. So one instance of the data for practitioners showed that females were dropping out of programming more often than males. So the service provider was able to connect this gap within services to what they identified as a lack of rapport with female participants because most of their staff were male. So they identified then a goal of increasing engagement with female participants by creating girls groups right at the local high school with the female staff that were in place. And over time, this practitioner was able to observe that females were staying more engaged with programming and that the girls group had become a source of new referrals as participants started right to bring their friends into the group as well. Several years now down the road from this first initiative first going live, we also see within our data that program dropout rates have decreased for both prevention and intervention services, which is really encouraging. Another core component towards being data informed is to integrate the use of data into your organizational culture, right? Doing a feedback loop alone is not enough, right? We really, on a cultural level, want to be able to integrate how we are using our data. So to bring the concept we've discussed together so far, I'd like to take a little time to talk about how we look at this integration. So if we truly want to be data informed in our work, we need to forge important connections between research and practice and ensure that these components are not separate from each other. This can be accomplished in part through some of the components we've already discussed, right? Such as investing in our data infrastructures, providing support for data collection and use, and committing to providing data back to practitioners to inform service delivery over time, right through those data feedback loops. Still, there are additional ways that we can build data into our organizations. And these include things such as integrating data right from the top down and including research teams in practice discussions to ensure that your data collection is really well aligned with your practice. There's really nothing worse than presenting data to a practitioner and having them say, that doesn't tell the story, right? That doesn't sound like my work to me. So we want to make sure, that our data and our practice are tightly aligned with each other. The data feedback loop training, is incredible. And there are also smaller ways to make data present in daily work, such as, the production and distribution of administrative reports on a regular basis. Finally, it's really been helpful to create clear policies, procedures, and expectations for the use of data within the organization. And finally, to create safe spaces for data discussion, discovery, and communication. So in my opinion, using data within an organization means moving away from a strict use of data for performance monitoring and more towards the use of data for exploration and understanding of service delivery. We hear time and time again from providers, in the early years, they were concerned about being dinged, as we say, We don't want to be dinged because my data isn't in place. And our line as a team has always been, hey, we want your data to tell the story of your work, So let's really focus on making sure we're documenting what you're doing in a way that when we look at the data together, you can say, yes, that is my story of services. So yet again, this is an area where technology can support, this organizational cultural changes. And we've really leveraged the capacity for ETO and Apricot in report building. And we've used that report building to create data dashboards, different types of visualizations, and interactive reports that are accessible in real time to users and provide a window into the story of the data being collected and what it can tell about service delivery. So again, for GRYD, this integration and use of data culturally is tied back again to that comprehensive strategy, to the identification of our research and evaluation team as a support for implementation of the comprehensive strategy, and to the inclusion of building research in a practice to deliver effective services as a core value. Data use also becomes possible through that regular production and distribution of reports. I've got an example right of one of our dashboards that we produce. This is an older example, but now it's so cool, right? We've got those actually programmed into the back end of the data systems. So we put them there because we want data to be front and center, right? To make data as accessible as possible to users of the systems, right? And also like a visual way, again, right? We're super into those data visuals. What can our data show us about our data, our services? What can our data tell us? How can we engage with our data? Our GRYD intranet, and I've got just a screenshot there of the coverage of our site, right? So our intranet also plays a role in building this organizational culture. And we use that right around the distribution of reports and supporting materials. And as a place where we can really have everyone have a level playing field with information access. So to bring these resources together, right, policies around the use of data systems in place require documentation of services, supports for use and understanding of these concepts being available, and right, having joint support for right the inclusion of this through both right our team as well as the GRYD office working jointly together help to build that organizational culture over time. All right, our next is and I believe this is actually my final core competency here, right? Looks at how we build organizational capacity to effectively assess impact. I know, right? Like impact is a big key concept right now. Like, what is our impact? What are we doing? What are we showing? So once we have a robust data infrastructure in place, it can become possible, right, to build our organization's capacity in order to do this, right, to assess our impact more effectively. Now, impact can mean many things in many different situations. And at this point, I really like to consider impact from a couple of angles. Right, first, impact can and should be investigated on many levels. And when I say many levels, I'm really talking about what is the impact of your program or your services on an individual participant? What impact, right, is the case manager having, right, in providing those services? What is a case manager's body of work, right? What is the impact of the program on the community or the population served, right? And those are just a couple of examples. I think for each program, like what you want to, your intention for your program, right, determines in some ways what your impact is. Next, right, building capacity to assess impact can include, right, again, building up your technology and researcher partnerships. These partnerships can help you identify the appropriate tools, best practices, right, for data systems technology, best practices within research and evaluation, right, and all of these things really work together in like a symbiotic way to be able to effectively assess your impact. And finally, working with evaluation partners to evaluate program effectiveness over the longer term allows for the production of studies that can apply more sophisticated statistical modeling and really dig deeply into what program data can say, right, about service delivery and help to identify on a larger scale both working and again, where adjustments may need to be considered. So this idea around like exploration of different areas of impact is sort of my personal passion project at this point in time. And really more specifically, I've been considering how do we demonstrate the impact of provider staff, right? So often I think you hear there's this bit of this disconnect between staff providing services, right, and the data they're putting in. And my challenge really has been to think through, right, how do we get away from thinking of our data as paperwork? How do we get away from, right, using our data systems as something that is, right, like if we leave it sitting too long unattended, can become an onerous task, right? How do we better engage the individuals who are, right, doing the work, right, providing the services in their data in a way that is meaningful to them and shows their personal impact within, within service delivery? So the work that I'm currently doing, right, in this area is really around, like, again, developing those reports within our data systems that are capable of looking at impact on multiple levels, right? So using your filters, using like the technology available to create reports that can look at, right, your individual, right, what your case manager, like your entire load of cases over time, right? So if you're a case manager, being able to go into a data system and see, hey, in my time as a case manager, I have served this many youth, and I have had this many youth with positive outcomes, and the youth that I have served have changed in this way, right? And all of this is documented by me within the services that I have delivered. So I think that is the real new frontier for me, right? Anyway, of assessing impact, is making it personal as well, right? For the people who are providing those services. So turning it back again to a last practice example, right, of what we have in place, and looking at that, right, that other bubble of our research and evaluation team diagram, is looking at, right, the primary goal for research and evaluation for our team is really around building and implementing a research agenda to both produce, right, our data feedback loops to continuously improve the delivery of services over time. So as you can see on this side, working with research and evaluation partners on an ongoing basis, right? An ongoing, not only when that annual report or your final grant report is coming due, can really create opportunities on a different level to build your capacity to assess impact in a number of ways. And some of these areas, right, are depicted here and include, right, first, working with partners to develop a research agenda, identifying those questions, right? Going back again to our slide of our data-informed process. How do we identify? Can we have someone to help us identify what questions we want to ask and that our data is capable of answering, right? As we move on our journey towards becoming data-informed. Right, next, conducting those longer-term studies and gaining insights into impacts, right, over time and on a larger scale. As a university-based research partner, our team has included faculty from Cal State LA, and we've also partnered with faculty at other institutions locally. Connecting with a university partner can also serve to increase access, right, to information on best practices in your field, right, as well as current research that is being conducted. So if you're not connected with, a university research partner, you might want to take a look and see if you can find someone working in your field, because there's a wealth, right, of information that is available. Data findings from the many different types of reports that we've discussed then continue to go on to inform training efforts. So this includes, right, my favorite, our data feedback loop training, but it also extends to other specific areas. So for example, we have a report that's available, on the GRYD side that looks, as one of the metrics is the need for mental health services when an individual is enrolling in programming. And it includes other factors as well. But looking in this data with practitioners, one agency observed that they really felt that their numbers around who was in need of mental health services was a lot lower, than they felt that it should be. And then asking that question, right? So again, they're sort of integrating that data-informed conversation here as well, but really asking that question led to a lot of rich observation and discussion around, well, why the data looked that way, right? So was it that we weren't answering correctly? Was it that we were skipping the question? Was it that really, we didn't have that many individuals in this area who had mental health needs at the start of the program? So one of the ways that the agency then was able to respond was, right, looking at how they organizationally were answering the question, right? And looking at the training that staff had to help them answer that question. And it turns out that some staff really felt that they did not have the tools that they needed appropriately to be able to correctly identify mental health needs at program intake, right? And this led that organization to then increase support for training and allow them to earn certifications related to, right, assessing mental health needs in programming. So that, right, becomes another way where data has, this great capacity to be able to identify, right, resourcing and needs within systems. Finally, another venue, excuse me, that we have used for GRYD in the past is, right, to celebrate the results of your data and your findings, right? I know there can be this tendency sometimes to say, oh, right, the reports are coming out and the data is coming and, oh, we don't want it to, say things that are negative about our work. And that is so understandable. So we should really take some time and care to celebrate what we find as well, right? And if what we're seeing is something that we want to change, what do we do, right, in order to change what we see? So we held these, pre-COVID, and then we've gotten back to things in smaller ways, but right, research and practice symposiums. So bringing those research findings from these larger studies to all practitioners, bringing everyone together, both to celebrate the work as well as what the data is telling us about the work. And in this way, right, again, creating yet another, right, sort of data-informed feedback loop to continue that discussions around what the data says about our programming, but also its impact for practice. And that, right, brings us to the end of our last of our core components. So thank you so much for sitting with me and learning about these concepts. And please let me know if you have any questions today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly, for sharing all of the work that you and the GRYD team are doing. I know that is a long trajectory and a long path and a lot of passion that goes into that. So really appreciate you sharing that. It really comes through when you talk about it, your excitement. And I thought it was really interesting hearing you say, impact is so important. I feel like that's really something we're huddling around too here at Bonterra, right? And just saying like, it really is about the impact, and data is such a key component of that. So really appreciate you sharing all of this great information. Looks like Shirley just wrote in the chat as well. Thank you so much. That this was awesome. I'll give folks a couple of moments to think of their questions, put anything in that you want to ask Molly about her work or her team's work. And in the meantime, if you are interested in the tools that the GRYD team is using for their case management, for their impact management, feel free to let us know. I've got another poll for you all. If you want to kind of elevate your culture, explore what their team uses. We'd love to show you and chat with you. So I'll leave that there while we wait for some questions. And as we do, Molly, I did have a question for you that
sure.
I know we kind of chatted about this in the initial part of our conversation when thinking about this webinar. I know, it's very clear you're very passionate about data, right? And you love it. But we know that that's not necessarily how everyone feels on a full team, right? And so, when we're thinking about really integrating this as part of a culture, how have you dealt with maybe some of that pushback or resistance that you get along the way where people might not be as excited as you get or see the value or need that you do?
I think that's a great question. It makes me laugh a little because to this day, right, and I have been involved in this work for over a decade at this point, and yet every time we meet with our practitioners, they're always like, Molly, you are so happy about the data. And I always give them a big smile and I say, somebody has to be, right? Someone has to love our data. So I think that's one of our goals, right? Learning to love our data a little bit more and really learning to not be afraid of what our data is telling us. And I think that's something that we start to learn like through our data and practice, feedback loop trainings. How can we use it in a way that isn't very punitive? How can we use it in a way that helps me understand what I am doing? It goes back to that sort of that individual impact look. Thinking back to when we first started with this initiative, practitioners really were not, right, that involved within our data collection systems. And I think, right, again, building that culture as well as building that infrastructure takes time, right? It's not something that may happen overnight. For us and within the field that we work in, within community violence intervention, it took a long time really to build relationships. And I think that building relationships is key. And another reason why, right, you don't just want your researchers to kind of hang out over here, right, and do those quarterly reports or do your grant funded reports, but to really allow, right, your research partners, right, and your data and technology partners to be an ongoing and present part of your work, right? I think for us, it's been important as well. And as I mentioned earlier in the call, right, is that myself and everyone on our team is really fluent in GRYD programs, right? We all have the handbooks basically memorized. We are really familiar with the policies and procedures, not only for data collection, but also for practice expectations. And that helps us achieve a lot of, right, really having data systems that align with practice, right? But also helps us have better conversations and better expectations for what's happening within the data. So I think a lot of it has just really been, right, approaching the data consistently and over time, right, again, for a decade, with the lens of, hey, we are here to help you with your data. right? We want you to succeed in your use of data. We want you to use, right, your data. We want you to maybe even love your data, right? Maybe pushing the envelope a little bit in that direction.
Yeah.
So I think having those goals and really taking the time, as an evaluation team to work with practice partners, sometimes even on a one-on-one level, to ensure that, right, users of data systems are understanding it. I think that what we found sometimes with, users of the data systems is that, right, first of all, we're talking about data. Second of all, it's technology. And these things may not fit squarely within the wheelhouse of comfort, right, of every service provider. And so we've really taken that upon ourselves as our end, is getting as down to basics as necessary in our training and to be as supportive as possible, no matter what the question or application. Sometimes that has really looked like, hey, like, let me help you understand how to open the link for the website within your service browser. Sometimes it has come down to, helping staff overcome literacy issues and looking for ways that they can do like voice record, right, instead of typing, right, to ease some of that data entry. So I think part of our role of a team has been always, right, like actively seeking and searching for ways to make the data feel more comfortable, right? And, right, to again, continuously improve our data systems so that we are always step in step with practice.
Yeah, that is very well said, very well put. And I think that with that mindset, I think you can get a lot of other people on board for loving their data as well, right?
Yes.
And kind of moving that needle. So I appreciate you sharing that, Molly.
Sure.
Shirley had mentioned in the Q&A that they're actually pre-implementation of Apricot, but are kind of ready to get started. So they're trying to gain as much insight of
Fantastic. That's so exciting.
making it as effective as possible. So Molly, as somebody who went through that implementation, I'm wondering, like, do you have one tidbit of advice for somebody kind of trying to make sure they're as effective as they can be within that tool?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such an exciting point of time, right? Thinking back on our implementations, so I think when we're starting to implement either, right, again, right, I always have my core competencies. I think one thing you really want to do if you are not familiar with your data software is to jump on into those trainings that are provided by Bonterra. I've been in Apricot for 2 years, and I finally got around to actually sitting on like one of the live administration webinars, and I still learn new things. I was like, oh, wow, that's a neat trick. I'm going to put this into practice. So I think, right, same thing we do with our providers. We have an intranet with like self-paced learning. Access that knowledge, use that knowledge. So I think you really want to ask all the questions possible, right, of, right, your implementation partners. If you're working with Bonterra directly, or you're doing it yourself, or you're working with, right, someone like Sidekick, who may be helping you to set up your Apricot instance. Really like working to ensure, right, that you have a good understanding of how your system is going to work is key, right? And I think the more information you have about how to administer the system, the better you can be in your decision making. Apricot can do some really fancy things, right? Both systems can, but Apricot is sort of this open box of creativity that can be applied to how you want your data to be structured. So I think don't be afraid to really have those conversations as you start to implement. I would say it's a great tool as well to really think through, like, how do I want to map out my workflows, right? Like, picture your workflows, put a map, and then take a look at the tools within the data system and see how you can configure it to reach those ends. I think Apricot and, right, and ETO and any data system can feel a little overwhelming. We're getting started because there are so many options. So I'd say, right, identify what you want, right? Identify what you want to ask. And if you don't have data collection forms already, this is a great time to start working with your frontline service providers and talking to them about, right, so what is important in your services that you're delivering? What are key metrics that you want to be able to track? I would say some of our most interesting data has actually come from observations and measures that were provided directly from practitioners back when we were building out our forms, right, as things that were important to the unique populations that are being served. So I think build those, those data collection forms in a way that has a relationship with the services provided, right? And finally, build them in a way that is usable for analysis. And by that, I largely mean like drop downs, standardize, right, as much as possible. Still providing, right, some opportunities for, right, everybody loves their case notes, and we want to really tell that narrative. And that, right, your narrative storytelling around service provision is one type of data collection. But if you really want to scale up and you really want to have good data that's usable to create actionable insights, right, and sort of standardize or look at programming, you need something that is going to be in more of like a drop-down style within your system.
Yeah.
So those are a few thoughts. I could keep going.
Those are great thoughts.
But I hope that's helpful.
And Shirley did actually write in that that's great advice. So
okay,
really,
thanks, Shirley. Have fun.
So, appreciate have fun. I love how excited you are. I especially right those beginning stages, and you can like look back and look where you are now and kind of see all of the growth that you've had over time. So
oh, definitely. You know, and we still have fun. I mean, I would say I always get
Yeah.
excited when new features are made available. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I think we as a team, we're like, oh, great, like new feature. Let's see how it works. Let's push the buttons. You know, oh, I forget that. It's always my best piece of advice, right, to anybody looking to build your data systems infrastructure, looking to use your data systems infrastructure, is to be a button pusher, right? Get on in there, push those buttons, see what they do, see what they work, get comfortable, get familiar, right? Don't be afraid of using your system and of pushing those buttons.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like you need that on a t-shirt somewhere.
Next webinar,
next one. We're just gonna call it the button pusher.
I love it. I love it. It'll be my tagline.
Perfect. Update your LinkedIn. That can be your new title, new description.
Perfect. I got it. I'm good to go.
That's awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions that have rolled in so far, Molly. So we'll let you go. But I really, really appreciate you coming to speak to this audience. I hope everyone was able to get as much value out of it as I know we get, and we get to like observe and listen and hear the great work that you're doing, and sharing really GRYD's message and work and all that you're able to accomplish and able to use that data for. So I really appreciate you sharing, being a great partner of ours, and really just being a great overall human in society, given all of the work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I truly enjoyed getting to talk about this work. So, you know, I appreciate getting to participate in these webinars as well.
Yeah, thank you. And to everyone on the line, appreciate you listening in. We hope to see you at our next sessions. Keep an eye on your email for the recording of this one so that you can rewatch it, revisit it, and keep an eye on your emails for any upcoming webinars. We truly appreciate you all, and we hope to see you in the virtual space soon. And thank you again, Molly. Have a wonderful rest of your day and week.
Thanks very much. You too, Amanda. Take care.
Bye, everyone.